Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Goodnight Miles. I'm Mima, and together with Pop Pop, we're here to share the love of bedtime stories, crafted especially for you, Miles, and for anyone who needs a moment of peace. This space is made just for you. A safe, cozy place to relax, feel at ease, and let the day just drift away. Tonight, we are starting a journey through timeless stories, beginning with the book, The Silent Rifleman, A Tale of the Texan Prairies by Henry William Herbert. Whether you're here every night or joining us just this once, know that you're exactly where you're meant to be. So get comfy, settle in, and let's begin. Chapter 1: The Horse and the Rider. I wanted an hour or two of sunset on a lovely evening in the latter part of September, when a single horseman might have been seen making his way to the westward, along the high, dry prairie land which lies between the upper portion of the river Nueces and the Bravo del Norte. He was a small, spare man of no great personal power, but of a figure which gave promise of great agility and capability of enduring fatigue, the most remarkable feature of which was his extraordinary length of arms. His countenance, without being in the least degree handsome, was pleasing and expressive. A short, heavy English rifle carrying a ball of 12 to the pound was slung by a black leather belt across his shoulder. The braided strap which supported his large buffalo horn powdered flask and bullet pouch of otter skin crossing it on his breast. From a leather girdle, which was buckled around his waist, he had hung a long, straight, two-edged sword in a steel scabbard with a silver basket hilt on the left side, which was counterbalanced by a long, broad-bladed hunting knife with a buckhorn hilt resting upon his right hip. There were holsters at the bow of his large Mexican saddle, containing a pair of fine dueling pistols with 10-inch barrels. And in addition to these, there was suspended from a pommel of formidable hatchet and a bright steel head and a spike at the back, like an Indian tomahawk, but in all respects a more ponderous and superior instrument. On the croup of his horse and attached to the cantel of the saddle, he carried a small valise of untanned leather, with a superb Mexican blanket of blue and scarlet strapped upon it, and a large leathern bottle with a horn drinking cup swinging from it on one side, while to the other was fastened a portion of the loin of a fat buck, which had fallen in the course of the morning by the rifle of the traveler. The horse which carried this well appointed rider was a dark brown thoroughbred. At length, when the sun was no longer above 3 times the width of his own disk from the level line of the lowest plain, he set his spurs to his horse and put him from the high slashing trot which he had hitherto maintained into a long slinging gallop which carried him over the ground at the rate of some 16 miles an hour. After he had ridden at this rate for 30 or 40 minutes, he reached the brow of one of the low rolling waves of earth, which constitute the surface of the prairie, and thence saw the land falling away into a long, gentle slope for some 6 miles towards the west, at which distance it was bounded by a long, continuous line of hills, whose range seemed interminable. At the base of this range appeared a dense line, looking somber enough at the distance, but which the experienced eye of the horseman well knew indicated a heavy growth of timber, perhaps a deep forest, and within its shadowy depths a wide and never failing stream. A short half hour brought them to the forest just as the sun was setting. Through this wild paradise, the mighty river rolled its pellucid waves, rapid and deep and strong, and as transparent as the purest crystal. Galloping his horse joyously over the rich green turf, the traveler soon reached the river at a spot where it was bordered by a little beach or margin of pure white sand, as firm and almost as hard as marble, and springing into the cool, clear water till it laved the heaving flanks of his charge, he suffered it to drink long and deep of the pure beverage, which had not touched its thirsty lips since early morning. This duty done, he returned to the shore, and selecting an oak tree about 2 feet in girth, around which the grass grew unusually tall and luxuriant, tied his companion to its stem by the lasso, or cord of plaited hide which was coiled at his saddle bow. Then, after polishing his accoutrements as if for parade, he hung the rifle and his broadsword from the fork of the stunted oak tree, collecting some dry leaves and branches and striking a light from the ready flint and steel. Soon had a clear, bright fire glancing and flashing in a sheltered nook, surrounded on all sides but one, that where his horse was tethered by a dense and impenetrable thicket of bays, prickly pear, and holly. Within a few minutes, half a dozen twigs, fixed on the ground about the blazing fire, supported as many steaks of fat venison, each with a biscuit under it, imbibing the delicious gravy, and a second with salt and pepper, all of which unusual dainties were supplied from the small valise of the provident and epicurean frontiersman. While his supper was cooking thus, and sending forth rich and unwonted odors through the forest, our traveler had prepared his simple couch, spreading his handsome poncho on the deep herbage, and the saddle with his saddle arranged for his pillow. If, however, he had hoped to enjoy his coming meal and his night's repose without interruption, he had reckoned without his host. For at the same instant in which his charge ceased from feeding, snuffed the air eagerly, and uttered a low whining, the traveler started to his feet and listened anxiously for a moment. Although there were so sounds which could have been distinguished by any human ear unsharpened by the necessities and habits of the woodman's life. Satisfied apparently that something was at hand which might mean mischief, he quietly took up his pistols and thrust them into his girdle, reached down his rifle from the branch on which it hung, loosened his wood knife in its scabbard, and passed the handle of the hatchet through a loop in his sword belt so that the head rested in a sort of fold or pocket in the leather, evidently prepared for its reception, and the haft lay close to his left thigh. These preparations made silently, promptly, yet deliberately, he stooped and laid his ear to the ground, nor did he raise himself to his full height for several minutes. 4, 6, 8, he muttered to himself at intervals. Yes, there are 8 of them. Again, he laid his ear to the ground and listened. Yes, there are 8 of them, sure enough, he again muttered. And then, after a pause, he added, but 2 of them are mules, I think, and they're coming right down hitherward. Then he looked at his rifle lock and cocked his piece. Unless they turn aside when they reach the timber, they will be on me in 5 minutes. And if they know the forest, they will not turn, that's certain. For here's the only place where you can find hard bottom to ride in and out of the old Bravo for 10 miles up and down. He paused from his soliloquy, listened again, and then a smile crept upon his intelligent face. He said, I've been disquieting myself for nothing. They are dragoon horses. I can tell their managed pace, though what the devil brings dragoons hither, the devil himself best knows. Then he hung up his arms as before, again removed the saddle and bridle from his horse, threw down his pistols and his hatchet on the grass, and instead of concealing himself in ambush unarmed except his wood knife, stepped quiet at his ease forth from the cover of his thicket and strolled boldly forward to meet the newcomers. He had not advanced above 100 yards from the spot where his horse was tethered and his fire burning before he discovered the little band of travelers just entering the belt of timber, at not above 100 yards distance from the point where he himself had ridden into it from the open prairie. That, however, which instantly caught the eye of the rover, was the form of a female. and a female, evidently of the superior class, forming one of the party, which, beside herself, consisted, as he saw at half a glance, of an officer and four privateers of dragoons or mounted riflemen. Precious lads, truly these, he muttered through his teeth. To be traveling the prairies and not see my trail at a short 100 yards. By Jove, I believe they will cross it without notice. However, I'll give them a fright anyhow, so here goes. And with the words, he clapped his hand to his mouth and uttered a long drawn Indian yell, which made the arches of the forest echo and re echo its cadence till it died quavering in the far distance. The rifles of the little party were cocked in an instant, and two or three were instinctively cast up and leveled in the direction whence the sound proceeded. But the woodman did not wait for any further demonstrations of hostility, but stepped calmly forth from his covert, calling out, as he did so in a loud, clear voice, "Whither and whence, friends, so carelessly this bright evening?" But ere his words were half out of his lips, he was interrupted by the sharp crack of a rifle, discharged at him within 20 paces, ball of which sang past his head, perhaps at a foot's distance. But entirely unmoved by the assault or by the peril he had run, he finished his sentence quietly and then added, "A miserably bad shot, my lad, and most unsoldierly act to fire a shot at all without waiting orders. Do you not say so, Lieutenant?" "You are very much to blame yourself, fellow, first, for yelling in that wild fashion for the purpose of creating an alarm, and then for approaching a command so rashly. Who are you, fellow? Speak." Fellow, replied the other, half soliloquizing. "And a command, hey, command truly. A couple of Comagulus or one of Jack Hay's men would make an end of such a command before it had seen where to throw away one bullet. Well, sir, who are you then, I pray?" "Pierre Delacroix, at your service." "What? He who is commonly known as Pierre?" "The partisan, Lieutenant," interrupted the other quietly. "Yes, I am the man. And my horse, Emperor, of whom you have heard, since you have heard of me, is down in the brake yonder. And what is the better thing just now? There is a good fire burning, and some venison steaks ready by this time, if they not be overdone, and a flask of good sherry wine and some cool water. If you and your fair lady will share the supper of the partisan, I shall be happy to think that I am pardoned for the slight alarm I gave you. And after supper, we will hear what has brought you hither, and what I can do to serve you. Is it a bargain?" "Surely it is, and very thankful shall we be for your hospitality, and yet more for your advice. This is the famous soldier Julia," he continued, turning to the lady who accompanied him, "of whom you have heard so much, and whom we had hoped to meet at San Antonio." No more words were spoken until they reached the spot which Delacroix had selected for his bivouac. But as they did so, an exclamation of pleasure burst from Julia's lips at the romantic beauty of the scene. The travelers immediately dismounted. Now, as Julia stood erect before the partisan, with the clear light of the blazing wood fire falling full on her face and revealing all the charms of a figure, tall as the tallest of her sex, voluptuous and fully rounded, yet slight withal, and delicate and slender at the fairest ideal of a poet's dream. He thought he had never looked upon anything so perfectly and femininely lovely. For some moments he stood gazing at her, mute and positively breathless with admiration. Then, suddenly recollecting himself, he called to the nearest of the dragoons, bidding him lead the lady's horse down to the river and water him, and then conduct her respectfully to the place where he had spread his poncho on the grass, and with the aid of that and his large saddle, arranged for her an extemporaneous armchair near the fire, which the fresh coolness of the words rendered not wholly needless, even at that season, while the thin smoke that rose from the wood embers kept the mosquitoes at a distance. Meanwhile, some of the dragoons applied themselves to clean the horses and the accoutrements, while others unloaded the pack mules and, unbuckling the bags and cases which they carried, produced camp kettles and canteens and a small India rubber tent and camp bed, which was speedily set up and prepared in the methodical manner of the old soldier, and promised better accommodations for the lady. My cooking is ready, lady, such as it is, said the partisan, and I fancy you have the Spartan sauce, which even makes the black broth palpable. Julia started a little at the classical allusion, cast a quick glance towards her young husband, whose attention had been fixed on another portion of the roving soldier's speech, and said quickly, repeating the partisan's word, Lady, indeed, I have been strangely remiss and discourteous, Major Delacroix. In the first hurry of our introduction, I forgot to name ourselves to you, though Yankee alike, yo, lank, yo, ugh, though Yankee like, yet I assure you I am not a Yankee. I by no means forgot to exhort from you all that I wish to know. I should have imagined, Jewel, that you would have found tongue enough by this time to make yourself known to Major Delacroix. But since it seems you have not done so, better late than never. Allow me, Major Delacroix, to present you to Miss Arthur Gordon, 6 weeks ago, Miss Julia Forrester of New Orleans. And that done, to call your attention to my very humble and unworthy self, Arthur Gordon, First Lieutenant of the 2nd Dragoons. When Arthur Gordon pronounced the words Julia Forrester, he started forward and exclaimed, What? What? It cannot be. The daughter of my best and oldest friend, Colonel John Forrester? I recollect his wife's name, who I never saw, was Julia. Julia Gordon blushed crimson as he spoke, and then in an instant turned pale as ashes. My mother, she gasped, with a great exertion of the will compelled herself to speak at all. My poor mother, I never saw her either, at least not within my recollection. Yes, Major Delacroix, I am Colonel John Forrester's wild and wilful daughter. God bless him, she continued, a big tear swelling in her eye, as he deserves a better child. Not so, young lady. I am certain that it is not so. A brighter or more beautiful he could not have, and it will be hard to convince me he could have had better. Lieutenant Gordon, allow me to shake your hand and congratulate you. Your father in law and your sweet lady's father was, I may say, to me more than a father, for when nature robbed me of both my parents, he supplied both their places. God bless John Forrester and all who loved and honored him. So thoroughly was the partisan engrossed by his own warm and generous feelings that he did not perceive at all what would be any other time have been sufficiently apparent to a man of his keen and intuitive sagacity. That there was something of evident discomposure in the manner of the young officer as he spoke to him of his father in law. Green carpet of meadow was spread for their simple fare, and the partisan did the honors of his camp with a singular blending of the frontierman's bluntness and the easy manners of the gentleman and soldier. There was, however, an inexplicable gloom hanging over the little party, and scarcely was the frugal meal ended before, on the pretext of weariness, the lady retired to her tent, and the husband went away for a few minutes, as he said, to inspect his sentries, while Pierre Delacroix filled his Indian pipe with kinnicky kinnicky and stretched himself at full length on his blanket in the warmth of the fire, rested his head on his elbow, and mused more deeply than he had done for many a year, rolling out all the time great volumes of the odoriferous smoke of that Indian mixture, which he had learned to prefer to the Havana. And that concludes our story today. As you drift off to sleep, may your heart rest easy, and may you rise tomorrow filled with joy and curiosity. Good night, Miles. Hop Pop and Mima love you endlessly.